Ladies and gentlemen around the world, I would like to welcome you to back to Around the Fire podcast. On today's episode, we have got on Dr. Anthony Chaffee. He is a neurosurgeon, nutritional researcher, and professional rugby player. And he's currently living in Australia. Welcome to the show, Dr. Chaffee. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. And so those of for the people who do not know much about you and your work, could you? I gave a brief introduction to you and your work, and could
Mhm.
you give them a little bit of more perspective on you and your life?
Well, yeah, I grew up in Southern California in Seattle, and played various sports from an early age, and played professional rugby for a time. I had opportunities with rugby that were quite interesting, and so I ended up taking some time off between my undergraduate degree and medical school to pursue those, um, and then went on to did my undergraduate degree in molecular and cellular biology with a minor in chemistry, and then went on to do my medical degree afterwards. And since then, I've practiced in various places. I was in Ireland for a few years, and then I was helping out with some family issues, and then I was doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh with the Rohingya refugees that escaped from Burma over to Bangladesh, and was helping out in the refugee camps there as just a volunteer doctor. And since then, I came back to clinical practice by coming to Australia, and I've been continuing my specialization into neurosurgery. During that time, I've always been interested in diet and nutrition, how that affects our health and performance specifically as an athlete, and came onto some early discoveries that really helped me perform at a level beyond my peers. And since then, I've done quite a lot of research into that and really focused on diet and nutrition, how that affects health, and especially in chronic disease um, side of things, because quite a lot of the diseases that we face today, the so-called chronic diseases, I believe aren't actually diseases per se, but actually toxicities and malnutrition, toxic buildup of species inappropriate diet, food that we're not supposed to eat, that we weren't designed biologically to eat, and lack of appropriate species-specific nutrition, namely food that we are supposed to eat, that we are genetically designed to absorb and to fuel us the best. So you can break this down in a number of different ways, but when you look at the massive uptick in diseases around the world since the late 70s, mostly when we radically changed the way we ate, you know, um, you can see that these so-called diseases have increased dramatically. And the obesity rates tripled, heart disease tripled, stroke rates tripled, cancer rates have tripled, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, even developmental delays, and such as autism, miscarriages, all these sorts of things have increased exponentially. These things were quite rare before then. Now they're the only things we treat. Even heart disease is the most common killer around the world. That didn't exist before the 20th century. The first, if I remember correctly, the first description of atherosclerotic plaque and heart disease was described in the 1920s. That's brand new in the medical world. And people say, "Oh, well, it was probably there, just people didn't notice it." And it's like, well, no, actually, like, you made your name as a doctor by finding something new and putting your name on it. There's a lot of things named after people in the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s, 1500s, even much before that. We have a vein in our brain called the vein of Galen. Galen was a Roman surgeon to Marcus Aurelius, and a brilliant surgeon and doctor. And his teachings were used for 1500 years afterwards. So these are not dumb people, and they do pay attention. So, heart disease was brand new in the 20th century. Really didn't see it before, and people attributed it to cholesterol and heart and saturated fat, but that wasn't true, because we were always eating fat and cholesterol and so forth. We never had this disease. And as one researcher in the 70s said, how can an ancient diet cause a new disease? Because it is a new disease. And so that's one example of food causing disease. And we think about it in that terminology. Well, it's like, oh, if you eat fat and cholesterol, that will cause heart disease or diabetes or something like that. And they're right. There is something that we're eating that's causing that, but it's not fat and cholesterol. A number of things. Usually sugar is the main thing. Sugar and carbohydrates and alcohol, the main things.
Yeah, and the surprising thing is that nowadays we consider something that was discovered, as you said, in 1920, all the other complications that tripled and became so prevalent as normal now. And that reminds me of something that you mentioned on Dr. Baker's show, and it stopped me on my track. I remember I was listening to your podcast on my bike, and I had to take a note of it. And for those of the listeners who haven't heard about it, could you please give us in the tale that you had about Roman elite and how they had toxicities?
Well, like with lead poisoning and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where, this is a classic example. It was in ancient Rome. They used lead for pipes. This is where we get the name for lead is plumbum. That's plumbing and things like that are derived from the Latin word for lead. So people had low-grade lead poisoning. Saying there's different suppositions as to why they didn't get very horrific lead poisoning. I thought it was like, well, the water had a certain consistency or acidity or something like that sort of blocked it. So it was minimal lead poisoning. It's still lead poisoning. And at the time, you had generations of people with low-grade lead poisoning, and they just figured, oh, this is just normal. This is how you're supposed to be. It's just like, yeah, your hair is supposed to bleed. And it's like, no, that's not normal. Like, there's a lot of things that aren't normal. But and eventually they figured that out. They said, okay, so something's abnormal. Something's making us sick. And they figured out that it was coming from those pipes, using those pipes. I don't know how, to the extent that they figured that out, but they figured, okay, this is a toxic substance. We can't use this, for our water that's leaching out something bad that we don't want. And they figured that out. And I think that that's sort of, where we're at right now. We're eating all these, plants and carbs and sugar and things like, obviously, alcohol. I mean, everyone knows that's a poison, but they don't realize how bad the rest of it is. And they don't realize that sugar is processed the same way as alcohol. It does the same damage to your body as alcohol. And so, we're getting these horrible diseases, and we feel like garbage, and people overeat and they don't know why, and they always feel hungry, and they get overweight, and they don't feel well. And so we're sort of in that period as well, where this is our lead pipes, is eating these plant-based foods that we're not designed to eat, that are quite toxic to us, because this is how plants defend themselves, is by being poisonous. That's botany 101, biology 101. I learned that in 7th grade biology, that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them, and animals becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants, so that they can eat that plant and safely, and break down the poison safely, and nothing else can. So that's their dedicated food source. That's their dedicated resource. And you see this in nature. Plants, or they're basically toxic to everything, but there are specific animals that can eat like a plant. But they eat like a plant, or like a certain family of plants or something like that have similar sort of poisons. Some you only eat one. I mean, cows eat grass. Koalas eat eucalyptus. Nothing else eats eucalyptus. Basically, it's a very toxic leaf. But koalas are adapted to it. So when you eat outside of your biological heritage, you're going to get into trouble, because you don't have the necessary processes to break these things down. So you can break down some things. Your liver is really good at that. That's its job. But it can get overloaded. Especially when you're just really just firing the stuff in, or especially if you're eating a lot of, and most people are very plant-based. Even like a normal Western diet is is a very high percentage of that is plant material, and we're eating less and less meat, or at least we have been historically in the last sort of 30-40 years, because we've been told that it's bad, and fat and cholesterol are bad. So I think we're in that period now, and because we just grew up eating vegetables and plants, and we just have this baseline level awful that we felt, and didn't realize it, because that's just normal, because we've always felt like that. And so we felt good and bad dependent on, as compared to how we felt before. But once you get out of that and you stop being poisoned, you realize that, like, you've actually felt horrible the rest of your entire life. I certainly do. I know what I feel like now. I know what I felt like, playing professional rugby, you know, basically, inadvertently doing carnivore. I didn't realize. I just knew plants were toxic, so I just stopped eating plants. And I didn't realize what I was doing and the significance of it. But I did that for a number of, something like 5 years. I don't know exactly the duration, but it was a number of years, and I never felt better. And then compare that to myself immediately after I went off of that without really realizing it, when I was playing professionally in England. And I just remember feeling, I was like, why don't I feel as just unbelievably amazing and just superhuman as I normally do? I was like, I'm not working out as hard. I'm not pushing myself. Like, what's going on? I was 25 at the time. I was like, is that the hump? Is that, people say, like, you hit 30, you're basically dead, So I was like, oh, like, I'm 25, I'm in my mid 20s. Like, is that it? It's just downhill from here. Like, I didn't know. But looking back, and that's how it was. I feel better now than I did when I was 25, 2 months off of carnivore, but I was still almost exclusively carnivore. But I was eating some things like breaded chicken and things like that, because it was just easier to come by in England. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's not that big a deal because it's not that much, but it made a big deal, and I just didn't spot it at the time, and now I haven't. So that's one of the things, all these diseases that we have, that we just call aging, used to be called the diseases of the West for hundreds of years. So you go to Australia, or North America, we see the Native Americans, the Native Australians, and elsewhere. They wouldn't get the diseases we got. These guys were pure carnivores. There's tons of literature on this. There's tons of explorer books and things like that have been written on these things. And they all talk about it and marvel how they're pure carnivores. They only eat meat, and they're just statues of people. I mean, they're just absolutely statuesque, and like and they live to a great age. They don't break down and wear out like the Europeans did, and they just ate meat. There's always a chapter on the diet of the native people on these explorers books that I've found, and they always just marvel at how they just ate meat and how they did it, different experiments, and how strong they were, how athletic they were, and all these sorts of things. And now those same people who were doing amazingly well, they're actually much more sick than other populations, because they don't have as much resistance to these poisons in these plants that people that had come from a heritage that had cultivation of crops. And that sort of agricultural revolution was roughly 8,000 years ago. So some populations have had more access to these. They've grown a little bit of resistance. Their livers have just got a little more attuned to breaking these poisons down, but they're not immune by any means. And so we still get the diseases. You still get the toxicities from it, because I don't even think of them as diseases anymore. I think they're toxicities. You can call lead does certain damage to your cells and your brain and your liver and all these sorts of things, and you could look at that molecularly and say, oh, this is a disease that does this, and figure out a medication that can sort of slow it down, and so you can die slowly over 40 years. Or you can realize that you're being poisoned, you're being exposed to something that is toxic, and eliminating that. And that's how I think of these other sorts of things, such as heart disease, even quite a lot of cancers as well. So people are genetically predisposed to certain cancers. There's other factors that go into cancer, but this is a major one, is the food that we eat. And so I think of these sorts of things as an exposure principle instead of as a disease principle. And one of the first things I learned when I was a kid, I remember it was just announced somewhere, I don't even remember what, but they said that when Native Americans ate a Western diet, they were 4 times as likely to get obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and all the rest. And I remember thinking, well, doesn't that mean that the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And if they do eat the food, and we eat the food and we get the disease, we just get it at a slower rate. And what's the, what's a non-Western diet? I mean, because that to me, it was just food. It just showed up. That's what food is. And, what are they eating, or what were they eating, that we're not, and vice versa. And, the answer was, it was meat. They don't tell you that, but it's pure carnivore. Just look at the Eskimos. They just eat blubber. There's no plants to eat in the North Pole, even if they wanted to, which they don't, because they're explorers, journals, talking about the ones in the sort of the southern Canada sort of region. They're like, okay, we get it. The people that are, way up north that, have no access to plants, just snow covered all the time, like, fine, they just eat meat all the time. But these guys down here, 3 months out of the year, it thaws out, and in their words, it's like, surely they could live off the bounty of the land, but they don't, and they were really amazed by that. But at the same time, they weren't getting the diseases of the West. Well, now they do, and they get it at a much higher rate, and they get it much faster. Here in Australia, people get much, much more sick. And, to the point that these people are suffering much more. They have much more problems with obesity and heart disease and cancer, diabetes, and all these sorts of things, peripheral vascular disease, everything, autoimmune disorders, you just name it, because they really don't have any defenses genetically. We barely have defenses. They have no defenses, and someone actually figured that out. There was a study where this guy basically sort of thought about that and said, you guys don't normally eat this. You guys normally eat, just animals you find in the bush. Why don't you go back to eating like that and see how you go? And he took people that were very, very sick, overweight, with multiple diseases, and it just went away. Their problems just went away. The weight dropped off, the diseases reversed, they came off their medications, and so forth. Because again, this is a toxicity principle. They don't have a disease. They're more genetically susceptible to these poisons than other people are. But that doesn't mean they have a disease. That means they are susceptible to a poison. And when you remove that poison, you stop being poisoned. It can do permanent damage. You may not reverse all of it. And, if you haven't, developed, in utero and as a kid, with, your mom eating carnivore and breastfeeding as a carnivore, and then feeding you meat, growing up and so forth, you haven't developed to your genetic potential. None of us have. Like cavemen, if you want to call them that, but prehistoric people before the agricultural revolution, their brains were much larger than ours, or at least 11% larger than the average brain is now. They were on average 6'4" in a lot of places. That's average. So most of them were above that, right? And you look at the Mongol horde like Genghis Khan, they just ate horses. They were carnivores. These guys ravaged the entire continent of Asia and Europe. They took over all of Asia and most of Europe. They pushed the European countries to the coast of France, and they were just eating horses, and they would eat something like 10 pounds of horse meat, and then they wouldn't eat for like 5 days, or they drink horse blood and things like that. These guys, little Mongolian Asian dudes, no, they were on average 6'4" as well. And average height of a population shows the average health of that population. And so as different populations getting shorter and shorter, that's not genetic. That's nutritional, that's developmental. And so, this is why you see, different people from Asia, they've been through like the different sort of, communist takeovers and famines and all these sorts of things, and went through real privation and starvation. And these just very, very short people. And then they come to, a Western country where there's better access to food. And all of a sudden their kids are 6'4", 6'5", like, oh, how'd that happen? It's like, well, the genes are there. It's just, the nutritional development wasn't there. So it's, yeah, I think it's a good example, looking back at the lead poisoning thing, because that was a clear example of when you're inside and it's hard to see what's going on while you're in the middle of it, because it's just normal to you. And we're in that now as well, but people are thankfully starting to see that.
Yeah, one of the things that I see dictators around the world do is to make everything vague, make everything gray. That there are so many differences. This can be viewed this way, that way, and they overcomplicate things that can be really simple. And this is something that is happening today. I mean, during the last decades, that the same thing is happening about nutrition, that nutrition is so complicated, and
Mhm.
everyone is different. And I love the example that you gave, how you illustrated this fact that there are no two animals from the same species that have
Mm.
two different optimal diets, and there is an
Yeah,
optimal diet that we should find. Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. We are one species. We're Homo sapiens sapiens actually. Um, if you have two animals that have a different evolved primary optimal diet, those are different species, and beyond that, I mean, because even things that are, I mean, like dogs and wolves or coyotes or whatever, they're separated, to a certain extent, but they're still carnivores as well. You have to really branch out further, um, but evolutionarily you have to be much more distant than that. Um, but yeah, that's the thing. We are one animal, and this is just basic biology. Animals have an evolved evolutionary niche, their evolved diet. All animals do, and we are animals. That's just what we are. um, Whether we were created as such or evolved as such, this is what we are. We are animals, and we're in the kingdom of animalia, and these rules do apply to us. And yeah, I talk to people, and they say, well, everyone's different. Maybe that diet works for you, but it wouldn't work for this person. It's just like, well, no. We do have an evolved diet. We do have something, a primary optimal diet. Now, some certain things are less bad. Certain non evolutionary sort of things are less bad for people. Like people from the European population will have an easier time with sugar, alcohol, cars, plants, and things like that than, say, Native Americans or Native Australians would. But that doesn't mean that those are good for Europeans. It just means they're less bad. And there's still an optimal diet. There is an optimal diet for a lion or a giraffe or a zebra or a cow. Cows don't do well on grain. They get fat and they get sick. That's why we give it to them. That's happening to us too. It fattens us up. It puts intramuscular fat on us. That marbling in a steak, of a grain-fed cow, like that's happening to you when you eat carbohydrates. That's what the insides of your muscles look like if you cut them open. And so, you know, I argue that humans are carnivores. I argue that our optimal diet is a carnivore diet, and to the exclusion of anything from another kingdom. But it is something. There is something. There is an optimal diet for humans, and you can figure that out. And you're looking at different data, like the evolutionary record and so forth, our biology. There's a lot of different sort of ways you can look at this. But there is something. And yeah, someone did say that to me. They said, "There's like, no, everyone's different. Everyone has a different thing like that." And I was just like, well, no. It's just like, and they kept pushing that, and they were very convinced that they were right. And so I just asked them, like, great, give me one example of two members of the same species that have different optimal diets. And he couldn't do it. He just, oh, well, actually, we just got to focus on this. I've got to do this. And he just like blew it off. I'm like, yeah, that's right. You can't do it. And because you can't do it, because it doesn't exist. It's just not there. I could challenge anyone to do that. It's just not going to happen. Like, two bald eagles they don't have a different optimal diet. Two cheetahs don't have different optimal. Lettuce is not good for one cheetah. Well, some cheetahs, they have good up for baked beans, and others, lettuce is best. Like, no, that's not the case. So yeah, I think that's very important. It just, like you saying, there's some things that are too generic, and other things that are too complex. There are a lot of complex reasons why certain things are good or bad for us. But it comes down to the simple fact that if you eat what your species evolved to eat, you'll be the healthiest version of yourself that you can be genetically. And if you eat anything else, it will detract from that significantly, even by being not as optimal. Like here's beef up here, like that's the best, right? And here's like the line of being good or bad for you, right? This is neutral, and so maybe here's like, lean chicken breast without the skin on. You don't have the fat. This is why it tastes bland. It's not that, it doesn't taste that good. This ain't, but a steak tastes amazing. That's because it has more nutrients that your body wants. It wants the fat. It wants the cholesterol. It wants all the other nutrients in it. And then below that line is every single plant on earth, because every single one is bad for you. So even if you're just eating the chicken breasts are good for you, but they're not as good for you. So I mean, it does take some things away, but either way, if you eat the way you were evolutionarily supposed to eat, you'll be much better off. And if you eat other things, you'll start having issues. Maybe you don't get enough nutrition, but maybe you get things that are actually causing direct harm to your body. And that's where plants and fungus and things like that, mushrooms. Everyone loves mushrooms. I don't know how many people love mushrooms, but a lot of people swear by mushrooms. And I always thought about that as a little odd, because there's 600,000 mushrooms and fungus out there. How many of those don't kill you on the spot or give you a religious experience, right? There's like 5, and yet we think that those 5 are not only safe, but good for you, which is a bold assumption to take with your health. And in fact, it's wrong. We know there's quite a lot of harmful chemicals in there because it's alive. It wants to stay alive. If you eat it, it dies. It doesn't want to do that. So it has a defense. All living things have a defense, down to single-celled organisms. While animals can run away or fight back, plants can't. So they use poison as their main deterrent, right? So if you think about it, all plants are poisonous. It's just that certain animals have evolved the ability to break down specific poisons in specific plants, right? But if they didn't evolve to eat that plant is bad for them, and for us as well.
And some grounds as to why we are carnivores. I remember that in one of your podcasts you mentioned that we lived through the ice age. Did all of the humans live through the ice age? And maybe one make this argument that okay, maybe those who went through the ice age, those who lived in those areas that was particularly cold, nothing grew, maybe uh, their children and I mean the people who are coming from that ancestry um, are really carnivores, but others also depend on plants. How big was this ice age and how impactful was it?
Well, I mean, the ice ages, covered nearly the entire globe. Um, and there's been tons of them. We're technically in an ice age right now. That's why we have polar ice caps. Those didn't exist 2.5 to 3 million years ago. There's about a 300 million year period where there were no polar ice caps whatsoever. So that's a relatively new thing as well. But that was the thing. Our ancestors, the hominins, split off from the other great apes about 8 million years ago. They were herbivorous at the time, which is we share similarities with other apes, because we come from that heritage. But we're different because our ancestors started eating meat. They started eating more and more meat, and that's what split off their evolution. Okay, and their brains got bigger, their teeth got smaller, their jaws got smaller because they were eating softer and softer food. They weren't chewing on sticks all day like a gorilla, and but the most important thing is our brains got bigger because we don't have claws. We can't chase down a buffalo and kill it with our mouth, So we had to grow our brain to figure out how are we going to get that food source without being able to kill this thing with our hands, right? You have a woolly mammoth that outdoes us by every physical metric. How are we going to take that thing out and eat that? Well, we had to figure it out. We had to figure out, ways of doing that, scaring them off cliffs so they, fell and died, and then using stone tools to cut them up and so forth. And so our brains developed, we developed tools, we developed tactics, and, and that's why we live in houses and lions don't. People say, well, we don't have, jaws like a lion. It's just like, right, well, we don't kill things with our mouths, and the reason that, and so we have hands, we could pick fruit, we can do all these things naturally, is like, yes. And if we were doing that, we would never have developed our brains because we wouldn't need to, because we just pick fruit. Well, I mean, how much brains do you need to pick fruit? Not much, and, monkeys do it all the time, and they, they're intelligent in respects to other species, but they're not doing calculus. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
We started from the Ice Age.
Ice ages, yeah. So we were going down that mechanism, right? And we're evolving more into humans, right? And then, first stone tools were about 3.3 million years ago. And then, so we're already, being able to kill animals, dismember them, all these sorts of things. Then the ice ages hit. And it's thought, if we look at our genetics, it looks like there was this bottleneck episode where basically the entire, human race, pre-human race sort of died down to about 10,000 individuals. And those were the only ones left. And so it's thought that these were the ones that were already eating animals, already knew how to hunt, already knew how to kill these big things, and had tools and had the ability to they were living as near carnivores anyway. Now they were able to live as complete carnivores, and they were the ones that survived, and everyone else died off. And so no, we don't think that they did. There are examples of sort of proto-humans at that time that's started sort of trying to go backwards and started eating plants. They died out, and so then the ones that survived as pure carnivores, during these ice ages, that's what drove that final leg of evolution to the first true human, Homo habilis, about 2.4 million years ago, who were full carnivores. Their ancestors were full carnivores, and they drove that, and their descendants were full carnivores, for another 2.1 million years until you get the Homo sapiens about 300,000 years ago. And we've been pure carnivores for about 292,000 years until some areas had, the cultivation of crops and so forth. In certain areas, about 7 areas around the world have independently come up with, plant cultivation. But this is a very, very new thing. And in fact, most places, we go to, most places around the world, we're still living as carnivores. Up until very, very recently, in many, many places, some places still are, and so, that's what you sort of have to get back to. So, people have, claimed that, the Eskimos are specially adapted to living in their environment. And, as we consider it, maybe that would be the case, but actually that's a throwback. We're especially adapted. We have actually branched out and adapted around the rest of the world. We are. We can adapt to things. That's why we're a very robust species. We do come from an herbivorous background. We still have a bit of defense from these plants. Felines and things like that. Most plants will just kill them. They are very, very sensitive to nearly every plant. Dogs somewhere in the middle. But we have some of these. We can sort of break down some of these things. We have a bit more defenses than other carnivores do, just because of our past herbivorous state is closer than like a lion's is. So it's actually the Eskimos and so forth. They're actually what humans actually lived like normally. So, we're in adaptation, not them, because for tens of thousands of years, most of the planet is covered in ice, most of it. Maybe there's some areas that, thaw out, and sometimes, sure there would be, but most of it was just a block of ice. And, and most of the humans living all over the place were just living as pure carnivores, and then it sort of thaws out and freezes again, thaws out, freezes again. But this is patterns of behavior. There's even if when things are less miserable and cold, the plan was still to eat animals, and now that it's more abundant, there's more life, there's more animals around. It's easier to do that. So you have a lot of studies that show this. Israel just published a paper looking at all the different sorts of data and studies and things like that, and they concluded that really for 2 million plus years, we really didn't eat anything except meat, fundamentally. There's a study called the stable isotope study, which looks at the fossil bones of early Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and things like that. And you can look at the different isotopes and different molecules in there and see exactly what did this thing eat. They deposit certain things due to animal protein and different sorts of things, and plants show up in a different way. So you can tell really what our ancestors ate and what other animals ate, and in the fossil bones we find, like what this animal ate and what that animal ate. And they found that our ancestors and other early humans from tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago and more, that these guys had a higher carnivore rating than lions and hyenas alive at the same time in the same area, right? Probably because they were eating the lions and hyenas as well. This is something that we throw around these terms, but people don't ever stop and think about it. Humans are apex predators. We are predators at the top of the food chain. Apex predators don't graze. This means you're a predator, but you're an apex predator, which means you don't have any natural predators. Like a sea lion is a predator. It eats other animals, and it's good at it. But it's not an apex predator because sharks eat the hell out of them, and so do orcas and so forth. So they're a predator, but they're not at the top of the food chain. Humans are at the top of the food chain. How many sharks eat kelp? How many lions eat grass? This is not something that apex predators do.
Yeah, and you said that for eating fruit, we didn't need to think that much. We didn't need that huge of a brain. So how about we transition to this part? Because some people in the carnivore community also consider eating plants, especially the plants that are very common these days, are much more modified and they have even more fructose. Some people consider them still normal as a part of our diet. What's your view on that?
Well, as far as like fruits and things like that, I mean, fruits like sugar's a bit of an outlier, as far because you can tell what's good or bad for you generally by taste. Right. Usually things that are bitter, that's bad for you. So your brain and your tongue, are sophisticated machines and they can recognize harmful chemicals. And they say there's like, this is a bad signal. It's like, don't eat this. This is bad. It's like a natural Mr. Yuck sticker. It's like, ugh, spit it out. Right. And so you naturally want to spit it out. And this is why kids do spit out vegetables when they eat it. And they look at you like just appalled, like, why would you give this to me, you monster? And they're like, no, you have to eat it. You have to eat it. And you're force feeding these poor kids this stuff and they just get used to it. Sugar is an outlier. Sugar tastes sweet. Most carbohydrates, like glucose, it's mildly sweet. It's not that sweet. Fructose is very sweet. It's thought from an evolutionary standpoint that plants that contain fructose, don't have things that are acutely poisonous for us, meaning that they'll kill you on the spot, right? And so we recognize, okay, this is a quick hit of energy. When you're starving out there, you're like lost in the woods and you don't have anything to eat. You just like start looking around like, well, what can I eat? You get desperate and you just start eating random plants, like trying for it. Oh, okay, that's bitter. That's bitter. And I was like, oh wait, that one's not that bad. Okay, maybe I'll eat that. So that's how that's thought, that this was something that we recognized as safe, and so we saw this like, okay, we can use this and get a quick hit of energy, and then we can get back on our normal. Get our normal food afterwards. That's fine. That helped, from a survival standpoint, because again, we're robust. We can get energy from different sources and nutrition from different sources, and we can survive on it. That's why we've been able to survive and adapt in various places. But no, there's just a ton of evidence showing how toxic fructose is. I mentioned earlier that fructose is broken down in the same way as alcohol. I wasn't exaggerating. Like that, it is. You can consider fructose and ethanol exactly the same, because when they go into your body, they get broken down into the exact same products. They go to your liver, they get broken down, and basically your liver, fructose is what yeast ferment into alcohol, right? But our livers actually finish that fermentation process, essentially, and then it flips into those same breakdown products as ethanol and fructose, and they all go down the exact same pathway. And because of those breakdown molecules, they're not good for you. They're quite toxic, and they cause a lot of diseases. And so we have this downstream effect. And this is why you're getting, children who are getting diseases that we used to only see in elderly alcoholics, right? And we actually had to rename it. Type 2 diabetes actually used to be named adult onset diabetes. And then that's what it was for, decades and decades and decades, right? And, fatty liver disease. Now there's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease as part of, metabolic syndrome and all these sorts of things. We don't really know why it happens, blah, 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 blah. But we do know now biochemically that fructose breaks down the exact same way as ethanol and breaks down into these fatty droplets in your liver, and you get fatty liver disease, you get cirrhosis, you get diabetes, you get peripheral insulin resistance, diabetes, you get heart disease, you get cancer, you get Alzheimer's, you get all these sorts of things. And there's mechanisms that have been shown conclusively that are causative in nature. They show cause. It's not a correlation. It's not just like, oh, well, we see some sort of connection, but we don't know what's causing what. No, we have causation. And the University of California in San Francisco Medical School is one of the top research institutions, medical research institutions in the world. They came out, and their biochemistry department came out in 2009 and showed biochemically what fructose does in the body and how it's broken down and what it goes into, and showed conclusively that it gets broken down to by the same mechanisms and in the same way to the same products and causes the same harm as alcohol does. So this isn't this is much better than like a controlled trial or something. Controlled trials are great for what they do, but when you have the biochemistry, you see like this molecule does this in your body. That is hard evidence. That's hard science. Randomized controlled trials are great, but it's not hard science. You have hundreds of thousands of different sorts of things. And you can run this sort of experiment. Then you start sort of getting more of the information out there. But there's a lot of junk science in medicine. There's a lot of junk papers in medicine. You have 10 people did this and 5 people did that, and you had some sort of difference. It's like, yeah, that's pretty useless. But you get published, and there's a lot of these things that get published. And a lot of people base these things, base their practice off these sorts of things that they really don't have good evidence. This is good evidence. This is exceptional evidence. Some people say, well, is there a randomized control trial, showing X, Y, and Z? It's just like, okay, is there a randomized control trial that shows the Pythagorean theorem works? Is there a randomized control trial that shows that, parachutes work? No, there isn't actually, and that's a classic sort of example. It's just like, where's the study that shows a parachute works? It's like, that's just, it doesn't count unless you have that. A good example that I heard the other day was, randomized control trial is great. Meta-analysis of randomized control trials, even better. You can really learn a lot from those. That's fine. But to say it's like, okay, I won't accept anything unless it's a meta-analysis of randomized control trials or randomized control trials themselves. That's like saying you're taking someone to court, and saying that the only evidence that we accept that videotape of someone committing a crime where you can clearly see their face, you can clearly see what's going on, you can clearly identify them on this video, that's the best evidence that we have. We see them doing it, right? And everyone can see it repeatedly, like, yes, that's him every time. Okay, so that's the best evidence. But now what if we said, okay, that's the only evidence that we'll accept? Well, then you're foregoing a lot of other pieces of evidence that are very, very good and can get you where you need to go. So yeah, the biochemistry department, I mean, this is like, we have all sorts of different, mechanisms and pathways and things like that we know about in biology and biochemistry and so forth. And there are ways of studying that and looking at that. And we've done that with fructose. So this is as hard a science as it gets in the biological sciences. And there's been a ton of studies since then showing causation of fructose causing metabolic syndrome and fatty liver disease and diabetes and so forth. And actually meets the criteria of causation, the official scientific criteria of causation. And and yet people are saying it's just like, oh, well, seasonal fruit is okay. And it's just like, okay. I guess it's okay, doing cocaine every night seasonally is okay, but it's not good for you. It's not a benefit to your life. If you don't do it as much, it's not as bad for you, but it's not ever good for you. Or the new trend is saying, oh, well, raw honey is good for you. Well, raw honey is not the same as processed sugar and this and the other. It's just like, well, no one ever said it was. Of course it's not. It's a complex, mixture of different sorts of chemicals. One of them happens to be fructose, and fructose is bad for you every time, And so maybe there's other things in raw honey that are good for you and do good things for you. So that's great. But the fructose is not one of them, And I mean, like, look, this is what bees eat. This is their whole diet. I'm sure there are good things there are things in there that are good for living creatures, but not us. I mean, there's some things that are going to be good for us, but not the whole package. And you have to look at the whole package. You have to look at the entire picture. You can't just focus on one thing. Saying there's a study where people ate honey instead of sugar and they had better outcomes. Like, whoop-de-doo, I mean, you mix in vitamin C with cocaine and fool yourself that you're doing this for your health, but you're not. You're really not. Well, but cocaine with vitamin C is better for you than normal cocaine. I mean, it's like, okay, yeah, but what point are you trying to prove here? The cocaine part of that is bad for you. It's still bad for you. It's not going to change. It's not going to stop being bad for you just because you added, some few things that are good for you. So I think it's strange. There's a lot of people that have, made a big name for themselves, recommending the carnivore diet and so forth, who are now saying, oh, well, actually, honey's okay, and seasonal fruit is okay. But I think that's a very dangerous thing to say. I think it's a little reckless because it's not good for you. It's never good for you. It's like saying, well, alcohol sometimes is okay. Like, yes, it's okay, but it's not good for you. And that's the point. We're talking about optimization. We're talking about the optimal diet. And if people want to, eat fruit or eat honey or, do drugs or whatever, I don't care. It's their life, But, the discussion we're having is what's optimal. Well, that's not optimal. If you enjoy smoking, go ahead. It's bad for you. But I don't want people being told that, oh, smoking sometimes it's okay, seasonally, like it's not bad for you. No, it is actually. It is bad for you. It's not as bad for you smoking every day, but it is bad for you. And just like cigarettes, fructose is addictive. It gives a dopamine response to your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. There are MRI studies that we have showing that fructose kills the same areas of your brain as meth to the same extent as meth. Okay, so this is one of the worst drugs on earth. Actually, there's a famous doctor in Amsterdam who said that that sugar is the worst drug on earth. This is in Amsterdam. They know something about drugs there, right? And he's saying this is the worst drug on earth. And I would agree with him. That's something that I've been saying for years. I think it is the worst drug in the world, simply because we don't even realize it's a drug. And so, food industry is able to put it in everything. And this is a major, major contributor to why we have lost our health as a planet. The obesity rate in England and the U.S. after World War II was 6%. It stayed 6% until 1980 when we changed our dietary recommendations dramatically. Now it's in the 20s and 30s. And you see that all throughout. You see, like in India and China and things like that, they don't have the obesity rate that other places do. They have more starvation as well, but their diabetes rate, metabolic syndrome rates are actually higher. Okay, because they're eating a lot of sugar as well. All these processed messes of so-called food are getting there, and they're eating quite a lot of it, and so they're having a much harder time with this because they're eating a lot more sugar. Sugar is bad for you. It's always bad for you. And telling people that, oh, it's okay sometimes, I think is really harmful because it is addictive. And some people if they can sort of eat fruit every now and then that's it, like once a year or twice a year or something like that, good for them. But that's not most people. And especially they're being said, well, you can eat it sometimes, you can eat a bit sometimes. So but they never define their terms. They never say exactly how much you can eat and how much you can do and how you have to be actually careful about it. They just, oh yeah, sometimes it's okay. Well, people just hear that and they say, oh, okay, fruit's okay. They start eating some fruit and they start eating some honey. Maybe they eat a little more and a little more and a little more, and all of a sudden, they're having a lot of problems again. And and they're eating other sorts of things as well, because carbohydrates really screw up your metabolism. We in biochemistry, talk about like a fed state and a fasting state. I completely disagree with that. I think that's completely backwards. I think our so-called fasting state is actually our primary metabolic state. This is where all of our heavy machinery comes to bear. You can mobilize energy in multiple different forms. You can access your fat stores and so forth, which is like your gas tank in your car. When you eat carbohydrates, it takes you out of that and you go into the fast or the fed state. Well, the only reason we call that a fed state and the other one a fasting state is by the time we were able to look at these things biochemically, everyone was eating carbohydrates. Say, oh, when you eat it looks like this. When you don't eat it looks like that. It's like, well, yeah, but when you eat everything except carbs, it also looks like this. And that's what all animals, and basically all animals in the wild, that's what their metabolism looks like with biochemistry work, looks like. So when you're eating carbohydrates, it really upends that. And you kick off into this, what I call it, it's a pathological insulin-driven defensive state, because high blood sugar is toxic. It kills people. This is what kills diabetics, right? And so the glucose molecule is actually fused to other molecules called glycation, and it disrupts them. It makes them act pathologically, or just destroys them altogether, and just damages and destroys your tissue and causes a lot of different sort of disease pathways. Your body recognizes this, and it goes, "Sweet Jesus, what has this idiot done?" And it slams up your insulin to drop your blood sugar as quickly as possible. This is hazmat damage control. So it's not like, oh, we'll creep it up and then slowly trickle it out, throughout the day. You need, 4,000 calories in pancakes in the morning, and you're hungry 2 hours later. Why is that? You shouldn't have to eat for 2 days on that, but you do. You feel hungry again. Why is that? So because your insulin stays up. It's not just like up a little bit and then it comes down. It slams up and it stays up because it's such a high level, and the half-life is such that it takes about 24 hours for your insulin level to come back down. Well, your blood sugars, when you're dropping lower, then your body wants it. Now you don't feel good. Now you don't have energy and you don't feel very well, right? This is why people say, well, you have to eat carbs to burn carbs, right? That's a stupid thing. Well, if you don't eat any carbs at all, you make the carbs that you need. You make the blood sugar, glycogen, muscle glycogen, liver glycogen, ketones, and so forth. You make them at exact levels, and you keep producing them. And it all is funded and sourced from your fat cells, and you can just keep pumping it out. So you never run out of it. Okay. Well, when you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar is up. Well, now it's down too low. And insulin forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells. Okay. So now everything's locked. So you've been forcing all this energy into your fat cells. They're gone now. That's done. You can't touch those. Some of it's been forced into muscle glycogen and liver glycogen. This isn't something clever to, get ready for a marathon. This is damage control. Like, get this out as quickly as possible. So it turns it into everything that it can, just forces it into cells everywhere it can in any form it can to get it out of the bloodstream, because it is harming you. Okay. And so then you can run on muscle glycogen and liver glycogen, but that runs out. All right. And you can't mobilize anymore. So you feel like crap and you don't have any energy and you feel lethargic. And so you want to eat because you're like, oh, I got to eat something because I just don't feel like I need more energy. Right. Even though you had, way too much already. But it also does something more insidious, which is blocks a hormone called leptin. Leptin is, we think of it as coming from our stretch, most people know it as coming from our stretch receptors in our stomach and first part of our small intestine. As when you have food in there, it sort of stretches this out. And so that sends off this signal saying, hey, we've got enough food, you can stop eating. That's leptin. But the majority of it actually comes from your fat cells. And that goes up to your brain and tells your brain how much energy you have, right? It's like a running gas gauge, right? It's like, this is how much fuel you have in the tank. Okay. And there's another hormone called ghrelin, which opposes that. So the stretch receptors, when they shrink down, you don't have anything in there. Ghrelin is produced and it says, oh, hey, we don't have anything in the stomach, but it's opposed by leptin. So you have the leptin from your fat tissue overriding. You have a little bit of ghrelin and you have a lot of leptin. Your brain goes, we're fine. Insulin blocks leptin. Okay. Fructose also blocks leptin. So there's a compounding effect when you're eating sugar. Okay. Fructose also upregulates ghrelin. Okay, so now your brain is blocked from seeing its leptin. So your brain gets a signal that you have zero energy reserves and you have way more ghrelin, meaning like there's nothing here and there's nothing gonna be here. And your blood sugar is dropping. So your brain gets this panic signal and it says, if you don't eat now, you will die. And so this is why 3 times a day, even if someone's very overweight, you're just going like, I'm starving, I have to eat. They get frantic. I know that feeling. I've had that feeling, multiple times a day sometimes. I haven't had that in years now. because that's not a real hunger signal. That is a pathological starvation state. That is actually what it feels like to starve to death. And that's why people use that phraseology. They say, I'm starving, I have to eat. They really do feel that. That actually is the feeling of starvation. Okay. And so when you're eating carbohydrates, especially when you're eating sugar, fructose, right? Because that compounds that. Fructose also blocks leptin. You're going to overeat, and your brain's going to get these signals saying that you need to eat, you need to eat, you need to eat, you need to keep eating. Okay. And so by suggesting to people that, oh yeah, you can have some honey sometimes, that's it's flying in the face of the last 12 years of hard biochemistry that we have out about fructose. And it's also ignoring the fact that this is an addictive substance, and people do become addicted to it. It's a very hard addiction to get off sometimes, and that it causes you to overeat. It causes you to not be able to trust your hunger signals, and because it disrupts that hormonal signaling pathway. And so you think you're starving to death when you're really not. And so you overeat, and you're overeating with things that are poisonous, and you're addicted to them now. And so you just keep eating more of these sorts of things. This is why it's in all the food. Food companies know what they're doing. They put this stuff in there to cause you to overeat. This is why everything has carbs, has sugar, like everything, things that really shouldn't have it to have it. And so I think that it's a very bad idea for people in this space, and in this, especially people that people listen to and look up to recommend these things in that fashion. And there's some people, you have this study, and it's like, oh, the fructose does something like this. And there was some people that I saw arguing, and they were just such tenuous arguments. It was like, well, there's this suggestion that fructose sort of does something, and if we don't get that, then we'll have all these problems. Okay, fine, but you're looking at like one metabolic function out of millions that are going on in your cells at all times, and you're focused on that one thing without actually looking at the entire picture. It's like the phrase, you can't see the forest for the trees. You're looking at this tree and you're like, oh, where's the forest? And it's like, dude, it's all around you. You have to look at everything around you. You have to look at the big picture. And so they focus on this one little thing. Oh, there's this one study that shows this one thing. Okay, fine, it might be true, but the preponderance of evidence and high quality evidence is showing that there's something else on the grand scheme of things. So maybe that does something somewhere, but it's really not good for you. There's no biochemical pathway in our body that we know of that requires fructose. It is a nutrient, right? We can use it for fuel and energy. It's not an essential nutrient. You don't need it for anything. Okay. Glucose is essential. Like that's the stuff of life. Blood sugar, glycogen, all these sorts of things. You need that stuff. You'll die without it. But it's not essential in the sense that we need it in our diet, right? That's what we think of as like being essential, is if we need it from our diet, but we make it. So it is a nutrient, but we don't actually need it in our diet. We make it, and we make it to exacting degrees. So it's actually bad for you when you take in carbohydrates and things like that, because it disrupts your biochemistry in major ways by screwing with your insulin process.
Yeah, I sometimes tried honey, and I can really attest to the fact that it is really addictive. You cannot stop, for example, at 2 spoons of honey. There is no such thing. You can eat really the whole jar. And also I have to be careful, and I don't want to put words in the mouth of Dr. Saladino, but I guess he said that the evidence that we have for fructose being damaging is only through animal studies, and those biochemical rat studies just shows that rats metabolize fructose in a different way that humans do. So
yeah, I don't know exactly what Saladino is referring to there. I haven't seen him argue that, but I do know that he's been sort of eating honey and things like that, and he put forward one study that showed, oh, if you eat honey instead of other sugar and things like that, you get like certain benefits or something. And there's one study, he didn't cite his source, so you can like look it up and see if this is something that, really supported its claims, because that's the thing, you need a study that says anything, that the conclusions say anything. So the point is, you don't look at the conclusions, you look at the study itself, you look at the results, you look at the, the data and the methods and how they came across the data and how they came by that conclusion. And you ask yourself, you say, okay, do I think that data supports that conclusion? Quite often, I would say not, especially in the medical sciences. I mean, people draw, fantastic conclusions based on, very, very slim evidence. And there was other doctors and things like that have come out and have done rebuttals to Saladino's video about that, talking about, it's like, well, and saying, showing that this was actually quite a low quality study. It had a lot of flaws for different sorts of reasons. So that wasn't really good. But, I mean, without the study, I mean, I don't really care, because, fructose itself, we have very hard data showing that it's bad for you. And just because honey is not as bad for you as something else really doesn't matter to me. The evidence we have on fructose is extremely robust. We have tons of studies on people. Dr. Robert Lustig from UCSF, he was the one who sort of broke this case open, fructose being toxic. He broke this open in 2009, and he's published dozens of papers since then, all on this subject, showing the biochemistry of it, showing exactly what it does in vivo, not in vitro. In vitro is like in the lab and tubes and things like that. In vivo, what it does in your body, he's shown this. So no, that's completely wrong. He also came out in the last couple of years. There's a study that he did with very sick kids, because you're saying that you're arguing that fructose causes these diseases. It causes metabolic syndrome and fatty liver disease and so forth and all these things. And you're saying, okay, if we just remove this, will that get rid of it? That's quite conclusive, right? So you have to take these sick kids. You take these sick kids that have all these problems, young kids. They're very metabolically unwell, and that's what Dr. Lustig's specialty was pediatric neuroendocrinology. So we dealt with very, very strange diseases in kids, and most notably metabolic diseases such as diabetes and obesity and different metabolic syndrome, all these things that came from that. And this is really one of the world's experts in this field, and in the area of fructose, I'd say he is the world's expert. So he did this experiment. They took, I think, 46 kids, very, very sick kids. And what they did, they replaced the sugary calories with carb calories, right? So they didn't give them good food. They gave them crap food, but they just replaced the calories from fructose with glucose, basically, right? So they had, as he puts it, he replaced donuts with bagels, right? So it's still kid food. It's still, breaded, hot, corn dogs and, garbage like that. So, and they didn't want them to lose weight. They didn't want them to eat any less calories. Okay, we'll keep the calories the same. We won't put them in a caloric deficit. And if they started to lose weight, they say, no, eat more. So they'd stay the same weight. So they didn't lose weight. They didn't eat less calories. The only thing different is they got rid of the fructose. They're still eating crap, right? And in 10 days, they essentially reversed metabolic syndrome in all of these kids. There was one outlier that's, stayed about the same. Everyone else got dramatically better. Their fatty liver, resolved dramatically. Their peripheral insulin resistance, got better. Like all the different sort of markers of disease and metabolic syndrome that these kids displayed all improved dramatically. So that study actually met the criteria for causation. So we have like, people know that smoking is bad for you, causing cancer and things like that, and so forth. That study that Lustig did met the exact same criteria for causation as our studies, showing that smoking is bad for you, and so it's actually quite good evidence. There's tons. I really encourage people to look up Dr. Lustig's work, Dr. Robert Lustig. He's had a ton of talks on YouTube and so forth. He's not arguing the same thing as I'm arguing, which is that humans are carnivores and really should only be eating meat exclusively. He's still sort of in keeping with some of the mainstream sort of recommendations, but he does also say there's like, fat's actually not as bad as we thought it was, and this and that. Well, now we have hard evidence to show that it was never bad for us in the first place, and all the studies that said it were actually fraudulent. They were bought and paid for by the sugar companies, sugar industries. We have the Journal of American Medical Association published actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in decades ago, saying that wow, there's evidence showing that fructose or that sugar causes heart disease, and they're like, oh, we need to cover this up. And so, their own words, they detailed how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol was causing heart disease when it was really sugar. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA in 1965, and now all of a sudden the USDA is declaring that cholesterol causes heart disease. Oh, surprise, surprise! And it's appealing to authority. It's this logical fallacy. It would just be, teachers come in and said it. I told you guys were wrong. Well, teacher can be wrong sometimes. And especially when those bodies have been taken over by outside influences, of course they're going to be wrong. I mean, people just get things wrong honestly as well, but this was come about dishonestly. Lustig writes about that as well. He's written books on the subject as well, detailing all these things, showing the evidence, showing exactly how these things were corrupted and how these studies and scientists were corrupted. Ansel Keys, who came up with the recommended daily allowances, things like that, was a very, very famous scientist. He was one of these guys who was paid off and paid to put these studies out there, and then people believed him. It's Ansel Keys. Why wouldn't you believe him? He's a really bright guy. Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, they do. But and there's tons of evidence. JAMA came out with that in 2015. Tons of other sources did as well. There's been books written on it, and tons of papers and tons of studies, and published these actual memos from these. We have this. People talk about the tobacco memos that showed that for decades they knew that this was harmful. They knew this was addictive. They knew it caused diseases and cancers and so forth. And they were hushing up. Oh, we got to get papers out there, flooding polluting the literature and so forth to cover this sort of up and say, see, I mean, the data is all over the place. We got 30 studies saying it causes harm, 30 studies saying that it doesn't cause harm. Like, where are we at here? That's by design. Well, then we found these memos in these congressional hearings and things like that. Oh, no, we don't know anything about this. And then they leaked these memos, and they're like, oh, really, guys? Nice. And so, they were lying, and they knew about all these sorts of things. Well, now we have the sugar memos. We have the memos from the sugar industry showing all of this stuff, that they knew exactly what was going on, and they were intentionally covering this stuff up. So that's hard evidence. I mean, that's just a matter of public record now. Also, people started relooking at this after Lustig started showing that really fructose is really what's causing the diabetes and the heart disease and all these sorts of things, in this manner, and it showed why and how. And so people started going like, okay, well, let's think about this again. They started redoing these big cholesterol trials, looking at statins, because we know that we knew that higher cholesterol was bad, and we have this statin, and that lowers your LDL cholesterol, raises your HDL cholesterol. Good, it must be good for you. They didn't actually check and see what were their positive outcomes. They just said it lowers cholesterol, therefore it's good, right? Or it lowers the bad cholesterol, therefore it's good. And so, someone in published in 2015, obviously, studies were done before that. They looked at it, was like, okay, is it actually good for you? We're using this endpoint of lower LDL cholesterol, but we never went one step further and said, okay, and is this causing less heart disease? Is this causing less strokes? Is this causing less deaths? The answer to that was no. People were having actually worse times. People, were actually, it was causing harm. People were having a worse outcome. It was at least equivocal, if not worse off, the people that were taking statins and so forth. Because statins have side effects too. They're a drug like any other, and they can cause harm. And so also, your cholesterol is not bad for you. It was never bad for you. That was a lie. And so when you're taking a drug to lower your cholesterol, well, you're taking away something that's actually potentially good for you, right? Well, if you're not eating sugar and carbohydrates or drinking alcohol, it is good for you. We get some cholesterol. There's a ton of different kinds of LDL cholesterol. And really, if you want to know what your cholesterol is doing, you have to get a particulate study and look at the different particulate sizes of your LDL cholesterol. But a good way of looking at it without doing that is looking at your HDL compared to your triglycerides. If you have high HDL and you have low triglycerides, it's very likely that the LDL that you have is good LDL. And so it doesn't matter what the number is, it's good. If that's, that ratio is flipped around, then like, oh, okay, well, you're eating a lot of sugar and drinking alcohol, and then you have your cholesterol is unhealthy, but it's also unhealthy in a context of an unhealthy inflammatory process that's precipitating diseases. You get some of the real bad ones that are more associated with atherosclerosis and so forth are SDLDL and VLDL. Okay, and these are metabolites of fructose and alcohol. Okay, so if you're not eating fructose or alcohol, you're not going to have SDLDL or VLDL. Now, you have to keep going there because we talked about the glycation earlier. When you have high blood sugar, you're glycating molecules. Well, you actually need to glycate those SDLDLs and VLDLs as well, but to get them to act in this ultra pathological sort of way, and along with this it's a whole complex biochemical system when you eat sugar and alcohol, and all the different sorts of systems that it disrupts and then precipitate atherosclerosis. But that's part of it. And so if you're not eating sugar or drinking alcohol, you're not going to have SDLDL or VLDL. And if you're not eating carbohydrates, you wouldn't be able to glycate the SDLDL and VLDL that you would have, which you don't. So if you're outside of that, you're not eating that crap. It doesn't matter what your cholesterol is. It's good for you. It's physiological, because it was never bad for you in the first place. And so if you're taking statin, if you're drinking and eating sugar and stuff like that, like, maybe statin might be good for you because you have this whole disease process going on that, this abnormal cholesterol is just one little part of. But if you're not eating any of that, then taking the statin is only going to cause harm. It's going to take away something that's good for your body, and it's going to have the side effects that it has, which actually directly damage the tissue in your body. It depletes your cells of vitamin CoQ10. Any doctor who prescribes statin without also prescribing vitamin CoQ10 is a dick, and honestly, that's malpractice in my estimation. Because what the definition of malpractice is that you did the wrong thing and it caused harm. Well, the wrong thing is giving somebody a cytotoxic medication that depletes the body of this really easy to come by vitamin that you could just say, hey, take it with this. And sending them off into the woods, just be like, oh yeah, you'll be fine. It's like, oh, well, you should look into that yourself. No, you're the doctor. You prescribe this. You need to do your due diligence and prescribe it with vitamin CoQ10, which is going to make this, much less dangerous for people. So this thing causes harm. It has harmful sort of components to it, and so and it's getting and so if you don't have that sort of abnormal cholesterol, like, you really don't need the statin. And people talk about cholesterol. I remember when I was in 8th grade, life sciences class, we were looking at the the molecular makeup of cells and all the different sorts of things. It was like the cell membrane was just molecules of glucose, 3D structure of cholesterol molecules. Just this entire membrane, cell membrane, was just cholesterol molecules. I remember thinking to myself, I was like, how can cholesterol be bad for you? We are cholesterol. Like, we're completely made out of, like, how is that bad for you? Our cells just cause cancer and heart disease? I mean, like, what? I didn't get that. It was just like, that doesn't sound right. And I keep looking through, like, through my science education and medical education and career, and you look at these sorts of things, you're like, that doesn't add up, that doesn't add up, that doesn't add up. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's why this complete crap. Unfortunately, there's a lot of that in medicine. Like I said, there's a lot of junk science. There's a lot of things that we base entire disciplines of medicine on suppositions that actually aren't based on any hard data. It was just a best guess, and was like, we think this is what's going on, and so we're going to act like it is, because that's the only game in town. And that's fine. That's what you have to do sometimes. But when people actually started doing these experiments, they started finding, oof, no, that's wrong. Oof, no, that's wrong. And that's it's a scientific method. You experiment and you trial different sorts of things to learn. This is why we're always learning things in medicine. But I as much as I love medicine, it's honestly, it's a soft science. Like it just is. Like we don't have the hard answers that like math or physics are going to have, or chemistry, or biochemistry for that matter. We just don't. We have some of it. We incorporate a lot of other scientific disciplines into medicine, but a lot of the things that we do as part of our practice are based on best guess. And so that's why you have to keep studying and looking. But and so it's fair enough to sort of look at things and ask questions. It's always good to do. But I would respectfully disagree with Dr. Saladino on this one to a large degree, because I just don't think that the evidence is supports the fact that fructose is a benign molecule. I think the evidence is very clear that this is an extremely toxic chemical. And I have a lot of patients and people that have approached me after I've said this sort of similar thing. They say, gosh, I tried eating fruit again after I watched Saladino say that, or carnivore Aurelius or whomever, saying that. And, I started eating it and I immediately felt really bad. I immediately got addicted again. I started eating carbs again. I started overeating again. I started just feeling horrible. I went in this whole spiral and it was really hard to come out of it. And I think that's going to be a very typical response to most people. They say, oh, okay, you can eat fruit. Oh, great. I can eat this sweet thing. And it's just gonna snowball from there. And I'm sure Saladino has the willpower to eat some honey sometimes, and that's it, and leave it at that. I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with that either myself, but I just wouldn't, because I'm not one that, I don't want to eat the sugar or the honey in the first place. So I really, if I had some, I'd be like, okay, yeah, get it out. Or like alcohol, like I just don't care anymore. I sort of had a head start, because I never drank during the rugby season. So it was 11 months out of the year, because I would play, sevens as well as union. So almost a year round season. So, I just wouldn't drink 11 months out of the year. And if you don't drink 11 months out of the year, you really don't just drink. So maybe I would drink like once every year or two sometimes. Now it's just like, yeah, I don't want it. Now I recognize, okay, this is a poison. This is what I can do to myself. I go to a friend's wedding sort of a year and a half ago, and it was just like, well, I'll do that and have drinks, with my friend. And that was fun. That was nice. But, I felt the effects on it for 3 full weeks after that. It's not just the hangover. The hangover it's nothing. It was like I couldn't do my workouts I normally do. I didn't have the energy I normally do. I didn't have the mental concentration and focus that I normally do. For 3 full weeks, it wasn't until the 4th week that I started getting back into my normal, pattern and feeling normal and being able to do the workouts to the extent that I do. At that point, it takes a full 3 weeks to get out of your system. People don't realize how much of a knock-on effect that these things have. They think of it just as in the short term. I ate this today, I don't feel as good today, or maybe tomorrow, or something like that. They don't realize this actually has effects weeks down the line. Or, oh, I just drink once a week. I was like, okay, well, that's there's a knock-on effect for 3 weeks. And I noticed that when I stopped drinking in the rugby season, I would only drink maybe once a week anyway. After the rugby game, I wouldn't drink any other time. And all of a sudden I noticed I felt amazingly better, the next day. I recovered so much better. I was training so much better the next week. And I improved so much faster than I had previously. And so it, makes a massive, massive difference. And so, I think that, recommending people get back into that unhealthy, those unhealthy sort of patterns, I think is it's not something that you should do lightly, and I don't think that it's the right thing to do in this case.
Yeah, and um, so many subjects came up, and I want to get to as many of them as we have time and as your time allows. Yeah, and also even looking at the short-term effects of sugar and fructose. when you have experienced ketosis and you have experienced that mental clarity, when you eat sugar, you stop that and you almost immediately feel the difference, and you really don't want to have that because you want that clarity, you want that focus. And also, you mentioned statins, and this is something that I really love to talk about because I see a lot of people improve their weight, their life, and their triglycerides, their HbA1c, everything improves, but their doctor, maybe they are even age 30, they are really young, but the doctor prescribes them statin drugs because
Mm.
their HDL, quote unquote, good cholesterol plus LDL, quote unquote, bad cholesterol is high. I mean, they don't even look at LDL alone. If they were following this common saying that LDL is bad, HDL is good, they wouldn't have prescribed it because the LDL was still in the range. But because the sum of
Yeah.
these two is high, they simply, like I don't know, ibuprofen, they like aspirin, they just prescribe statins. And I'd
Yeah.
like you to talk about the dangers of statins for brain health, if possible.
So, you're right. Yeah. So, prescribing statins or anything like that, for total cholesterol is, I mean, it's outmoded even in the cholesterol model of heart disease sort of thoughts. So that's really, people really shouldn't be doing that. As we've studied cholesterol more and more and more, at first they said, oh, people with higher cholesterol have more heart disease. That's actually not true. That was from the Framingham study. They followed like 76,000 people, and they said that, oh, this shows that people with higher cholesterol have worse outcomes, cardiovascular outcomes. That was actually wrong. Their own data actually showed the opposite of that. They just reported it, and this is why you have to read the study yourself, because their conclusions were in complete contradiction to their own data and their own results. Okay, so that's why you have to read the actual studies. But even then, they said, okay, total cholesterol, and then they started looking at, okay, there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol, and HDL is good and LDL, okay, this seems to be associated, 1.3, times increased relative risk of heart disease if your LDL is up as opposed to, so it's just like, it's a very tenuous thing in the first place. And then, people were noticing for decades that, people are having heart attacks. 50% of people who had heart attacks had low LDL cholesterol. If it's just a 1-to-1 LDL cholesterol to heart attacks, why is that? That doesn't make any sense. So people have known for a long time that something was off with that. But just basing things off of total cholesterol, that's entirely wrong and utterly wrong. It shouldn't even be on there, because it is. So someone asked me to, a friend of mine asked me to look at their cholesterol, just the other day, and that was one of the things. It was still a marker on there. It's like, oh, total cholesterol should be under this number. It's like, no, because HDL is supposed to be just over this number. It doesn't matter how high. There's no limit to how high. They say that HDL is good for you. So obviously, your total cholesterol is a product of, or is a sum of these two things. So that's a bad way to look at it. I don't know specifically about statins and brain health. I haven't looked at any studies specifically that go into statins and brain health, but you can infer quite a lot from this. This is your brain is made out of fat and cholesterol. This is how the brain functions. 70% of the solid matter of your brain is fat, fat and cholesterol. And so, when you're reducing your cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol is actually good cholesterol. The HDL cholesterol is very good cholesterol. These are all different molecules that do different things in your body, and they're important. The brain is made out of fat. When every minute that we're awake, we get low-grade brain damage, and when our neurons are firing, they actually get damaged. Our neurotransmitters break down into components that are actually toxic to our neurons. It's a crazy thing. I don't know how that passed through evolution, but it's true. And so our neurotransmitters break down into toxic substances, and that damages the cell and so forth, and it gets damaged in other ways as well. And so it needs to turn off and rest, and And this is why, different parts of your brain are on and off at different times. This is why we have to sleep, because your brain needs rest and it needs to rebuild and regrow. Well, if you get less than 6 hours of sleep on average a night, you're 6 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's later in life. Okay? It's because your brain's slowly breaking down and you're not sleeping enough to build it back up. Okay? But it's also been shown that people with higher saturated fat, higher LDL cholesterol, bad cholesterol, and so forth, are protected against Alzheimer's, protected against Parkinson's, protected against dementia, protected against autism. Okay, mothers with higher LDL cholesterol and saturated fat intake have lower rates of kids with autism. Okay, and there's a whole bunch of things that go into autism as well. Studies that show causation actually to do with diet, but that's just one part of this. So if you're not eating fats and cholesterol and so forth, you're eating a heart healthy low fat diet, you're not giving your brain the materials that it needs to regrow. Now you may be getting enough sleep. You get sleep and you get the workers to the job site, right? But you can only sweep so much. If you want to build a building, you need to put down some concrete. Well, you need concrete for that. And so you think of cholesterol and saturated fat as that concrete. Now your brain is made out of specific fats. Like 20% of the fats in your brain are the DHA. And a lot of these things are like very long, and DHA doesn't exist in plants or fungus or whatever. You have to get it from animal sources. This is why people cut down the fat, or they'll cut down, maybe they'll eat, vegetable oils and things like that, which that's completely toxic anyway. They get very unstable once they get out of the plant. They're not good for you in the plant, but they're really bad for you out of the plant. And when you cook with them, that speeds up that reaction. Every 10 degrees centigrade you go up, doubles the reaction rate. So you get up to a normal cooking temperature, and you can increase this breakdown rate by tens of millions of times, okay, hundreds of millions. That's bad. And the fats are actually quite bad too. They have omega-6s as opposed to omega-3s. The omega-6s break down into very pro-inflammatory molecules that cause a lot of harm. So there's a lot of problems with those. But you're specifically not getting the types of fat that you need to grow your brain. The very long chain fatty acids and the DHAs, right? The 20 and 22 chain fatty acids that you don't get in the plant kingdom, right? You have to get these from animal sources. And so, because we don't really make them well ourselves, we really do have to get them from our diet. They're essential fatty acids, okay? So if you're, eating a low-fat diet, even if you're getting enough sleep, your brain's not going to be able to rebuild itself. It's going to be okay with the sleep and everything like that, but it'll break down. It's going to break down. This is why our brains atrophy. As we age. That's normal for aging. It's like, no, your brain is decaying. That's not good. We're just accepted it as normal, just like the Romans with the lead pipes. They've accepted that as normal because that's what they've always seen. Okay, I guess that's just what you do. But no, you don't have to. So, cholesterol is part of that. Cholesterol is really good for your brain. Cholesterol, most of your brain is cholesterol. Like I said, every cell membrane in your body is cholesterol, right? And so if you're taking a statin, which again is cytotoxic and it causes direct damage to your cells, unless you supplement with vitamin CoQ10, and there's other side effects as well. But most people don't take it with vitamin CoQ10. This is why they have real bad like muscle cramps and muscle aches and all these sorts of that's their cells, getting in trouble. You work out really hard, you get a lot of lactic acid. You're like, oh, that's really sore. You're getting that sort of sore feeling because you're damaging your cells because of this lack of vitamin CoQ10. And then you're reducing the cholesterol, which is really good for you and it's really good for your brain. So you're going to affect, how your brain functions and repairs itself if you limit, one of its core substrates. So, I can't remember any studies looking specifically at statins and brain function, except in that people that were, taking statins and so forth actually had worse, cardiovascular, cerebrovascular events. So they're actually getting, more strokes, more heart attacks, and things like that. But you can infer just from the functions of these drugs that this is reducing cholesterol, which is good for your brain. Therefore, it's going to, restrict that functionality of your brain and that rebuilding of these structures in your brain.
And how about if you now move on to exercise? What sort of exercise would you recommend for brain health, for body health, and which one is more evolutionary consistent?
Well, any exercise is good. A lot of some people have been sick for a long time, or broken down their body and so forth in various ways. Arthritis, and it's painful. Walking is very good. That's something that anyone can do. The Maasai in Africa, these guys look like they're Olympically fit. They could run for forever, and they look at, okay, do these guys just work out all the time? These guys are just ripped. They found out no. They found out that they only worked out 1.6 times as much as the average American. And at the time, we're considering that the average American was pretty slovenly, pretty lazy, and so exercise is really important. Diet is the most important. Everyone thinks it's just like, oh, it's part of it's diet, and part of it's hard work. And I argue that it's 100% diet, and everything else is a product of your diet, because it doesn't matter how much hard work you put in. If you're putting in crap in your body, you're not going to get the full benefits of that. You could have a Ferrari and it tuned it up like perfectly, learn how to drive it, exactly what to do. But if you put in diesel into a petrol engine, you're going to destroy it. Like, that's all there is to it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you had, well, it's like, okay, well, maybe just a bit, maybe some, so 5% diesel in a petrol car, maybe just some diesel every now and then, just on your birthday, just for like a special occasion or something. It's like, no, like you're going to ruin that. And so that is definitely the most important thing, is getting the proper nutrition. After that, the exercise really, really, pole vaults you forward, because there's a lot of different sorts of stimulus that exercise gives. It's just basically the old adage, you get busy living or you get busy dying. If you're exercising, you're pushing yourself, you're giving a lot of signals to your brain and your body to like, we need to keep going, we need to rebuild, we need to regrow, we need to get bigger and stronger and better. Okay, because we're still living here. We're not done here yet. Okay, so we still got to go. There are a ton of studies that look at brain health and dementia and so forth, in respects to physical fitness and physical strength. Okay, muscle mass. People that are elderly that have that more muscle mass have much better outcomes long term. There was one study that looked at just leg strength and longevity and staying out of nursing homes and being independent and overall health and so forth. There was a very, very strong correlation between the strength of someone's legs, and their overall health going forward as they aged. It's something that's quite sad to see. The elderly population, sometimes people get so weak they literally can't lift themselves out of a chair. They can't lift their own weight out of the chair with their own legs. That's quite sad, and when you start going backwards like that, you become bedbound. You can't really walk anymore. You're just sort of in chair. Someone has to help you out, or you get like a special chair that sort of picks you up and takes you out, and you can sort of putter around. You're not going to be able to do a lot for yourself for very much longer. And when you get to that point, the less you do, the less you're able to do. And so that is you hit a sharp decline once you start getting into that category. And so by maintaining your strength with resistance exercises, but even just walking or jogging if you can, or the stationary bike is very good for leg strength and so forth, something that people can do hopefully in their own home if they can afford that. But anyone can afford to walk, I hope. And but what I do, I like running. I've always played field sports and so forth, so I really like being able to run and to sprint and being athletic and having that feeling that I can do dynamic things with my body. I also really like weightlifting as well, and resistance weight training I think is very, very good. There's a lot of different sorts of neurochemicals that get stimulated when you work out heavily. It actually makes your brain work better. When I was studying for my MCATs and so forth, I kept playing rugby, and I kept making sure that I was doing all my exercises, because it made my brain work better. And so that's something that we also know. I'm I'm a big fan of weight training. I think that it's very beneficial. You obviously need to know the right techniques and so forth, but because you can really hurt yourself. This is why, like, things like CrossFit and so forth. Sometimes you have a good trainer, or like, someone who shows people the right technique and the right form. But then there's a lot of people that's quite disturbing. They say, oh, just do like a like a clean and jerk or a snatch or whatever, or a deadlift. Just do it any way you can, any way you can get it up. It doesn't matter. Functional strength and all these sorts of things. Like, no, that's dysfunctional, because you're moving your body in ways that aren't supported by the main muscle groups. And so you're kinked out, you're in a little thing, and all of a sudden you're putting yourself into a position of weakness, and you get serious injuries. And so, always know what you're doing, always get the technique right. Techniques is everything, I mean, like, everything, in sports, in science, in work, everything. I mean, you can be sloppy on anything, but if you get the details right, you get the technique right, you're going to be better off. A mathematician, it's technique. You have to do this perfectly. You have to do these sorts of things perfectly, or you'll get the wrong answer. You're not going to be able to solve anything. In surgery, it's technique. I mean, you really need to know how to do these things properly. It makes a difference, and so that's with everything in life. It's one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned is technique is everything. You start with the technique, you get it perfect, and then you go on elsewhere. So you get the technique perfect, and then you go up on weight. People say, well, I want to lift big, I want to do this, and they sacrifice their technique and their body position and so forth to try to struggle out something. Well, you're going to get hurt. You're going to destroy one of your joints, and you're not going to like it. So, get the technique, get it right, and then build up the muscle. That'll come. You just have to be patient. But I think that those sorts of workouts are extremely beneficial to everybody. And it just also is just fun when you're doing it. Like I was saying, when you're in this metabolic state, then you can mobilize energy freely. You make the energy that you need for whatever you're doing. Sitting here talking to you, my body's making the exact amount of energy that I need to sit here and talk to you. Okay. But when I work out, my body produces the exact amount of energy I need to do whatever I'm doing. So when I work out harder, I produce more energy. Well, when you burn energy, it actually makes you feel good. This is why people take stimulants. This is why they drink coffee or do cocaine or meth or something like that. It makes you feel good when you're burning energy. You feel alive. Okay. So when I work out, I burn more energy and I feel amazing. Most people drink a Red Bull or an energy drink or something like that so that they can have energy so that they can work out, right? I'm the opposite. I work out so that I can have energy, right? And so the harder I work out, the more energy I'm burning, the better I feel, which makes me want to work out harder, which makes me feel better, which makes me want to have, so it's this positive feedback loop. And you get into that. And this is what we used to call the runner's high. You'd run and run, and then you'd hit the wall and you just feel raw. And most people stop right there. Most people don't even get to the wall. But if you go to the wall, most people stop at the wall because it sucks. It's a wall. You run into it. It's a very descriptive term. I've been there. And I've also been where you just keep pushing, and then you break through the wall and you get your second wind and you just go and you get this runner's high and you just feel amazing. You just go forever. Been there too. But biochemically, what that is that you're eating carbohydrates, your insulin's up, so it's blocking all this energy, all your energy mobilization. But you have blood sugar and you have liver glycogen and you have muscle glycogen, and so you're using those and you have energy and you're using them. Maybe you drink some coffee or a Red Bull or something like that, and you have a little more energy from that. And eventually that's going to run out, and you'll hit the wall because your body cannot produce more energy. It can't. And so you feel rotten. And the more you do, like, the worse you feel. Like, oh my God, I can't do this. Normally it takes about 24 hours for you to run out that clock. That's why people do intermittent fasting. They wait out the clock and then they fast once a week and they feel amazing. That's when they run marathons. It's like, yeah, because you're in the metabolic state you want to be. But if you push through it, you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, you'll force your body to start making energy again. You'll force yourself back into that metabolic state that you're supposed to be in all the time. And then you're producing all the energy that you need for what you're doing, right? And that's what that runner's high is. That's what that, that second wind feels like. Well, I live in that second wind. I'm always in a runner's high because my body's always in that biochemical state. And so when I work out, I just feel better. And it's almost like, it's almost like a vice, because like, I go to the gym and I start lifting weights. I don't want to leave because I feel really good when I do it. It's like I just feel amazing. Arnold Schwarzenegger said that actually on his, now he's all doing the whole, like Game Changers non.
So I already hit the record button.
All
Sorry,
good.
disconnect.
Yeah, that's all right.
So we got to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that was when I got disconnected. So we can go
yeah.
there.
Yeah. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, like he, he was eating just tons of meat and so forth, and almost exclusively meat, really, from the sounds of it, from his own sort of accounts. And he was saying he always felt good. Every time you work out, every time you lift, you just felt better and better. Just felt amazing. And that he's describing exactly what I described to you there. Is that biochemical process where your body's just building or releasing all this energy, burning all this energy because of the things that you're doing. You're stimulating it too. It makes you feel good. And so, it's just that whole principle. So it's, I really enjoy working out. I really enjoy my workouts, and I have to be careful because sometimes I'll be there for like 4 hours, and I really can't. I was like, I've got things to do. I can't do that. But when I was in Seattle and I had a bit more time, I basically I had a weight room in my house, which was great because I had exactly what I wanted. I didn't have to wait for some, jabroni doing curls on the squat rack or something like that. It's just like, get out of the way. So I could just do whatever I wanted, as much as I wanted. And so, when I do everything I need to do during the day, and I come home, and however much time I had, I just lift, and I'd put on like books on tape and or interviews or lectures or debates on by different people I found interesting, or topics that I found interesting. And I would just listen. I figured that I could, if I was listening to something educational, I could, justify, working out for 4 hours. And sometimes I would, I just lift for like 3 to 4 hours. If I had 3 hours, I'd lift for 3 hours. If I had 4 hours, I'd lift for 4 hours. And I wouldn't get sore. I wouldn't run out of energy. I wouldn't get tired. I just want to keep going. And I would have to just sort of cut myself off at around 11:30, and then eat a big steak and go to sleep. But I just, always felt just amazing for having done that, and like, recently I haven't been able to, get in the gym recently, and it's like, I still feel good. I still feel great, but I don't, I really do miss, being in the gym. And so, just getting back into that now, but, you just get sort of stuck, and you get the little COVID restrictions, shutting down gyms every now and then. And, then, other sorts of things get in, and you sort of get out of the habit of it. But I think lifting weights is staying fit, whatever exercise you're able to do, and always just challenging yourself. Don't just stay in one spot. You want to grow. And so, if all you can do is walk, then just walk. And if you can walk 5 minutes, then walk for 5 minutes. And then if you can do 7 minutes the next week, and 10 minutes the week after, and so forth, just whatever you do, just build up. And the more you do, the more you'll be able to do. And you're lifting weights, just, again, technique, just keep it, solid technique, and then just be a low weight. Who cares? Just do it correctly, and then build up from there. And so whatever you do, just build on it, every time. And I think that's a good model. When I recommend people lifting weight, working out, like whatever you do, just push yourself. Go until you're physically fatigued, go until muscle exhaustion, go until you can't go anymore, and then keep going. Most people don't do that. And that's the difference, in between someone who gets very good results or an elite athlete, and someone who, is, average, is that, you really go, like, I don't go, if I can do 12 sets, I don't just stop it. If I'm going to do 10, if I can do 2 more, I'll do 2 more. I'll go until I can't go anymore. I figure I consider that the workout. I don't consider the 10, reps just, we'll do 10, that's fine. Most people just stop at that. Well, most people don't get good results, and so it's those last 2 reps that actually make the difference, that actually make the workout, where you're struggling to get those last 2 out. Those make all the difference. And so whatever you do, just challenge yourself every time and push yourself, and always go to fatigue, and always go to failure. That's
Yeah,
what I would suggest.
yeah, that's exactly what my experience has been also. Even when I had a crappy diet, after doing exercise, I felt
Yeah.
that I am ready for work, for mental work, for any kind of work.
Yeah.
And now it is even more pronounced. And I really go to the gym, and I feel after that, yes, this is the start of my day. From now, I can
Yeah.
go on. Yeah. So my connection is very unstable, and I want to also be very respectful of your time. And thanks for your time. And I
Yeah, you're
learned
very
a lot
welcome.
from this session.
Good.
And yeah, there are going to be a lot of notes that I am going to take from this session that I had with you. So
Good.
thank you so much. It means a
Yeah.
lot to me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
you're very welcome. It was good to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Round the Fire. If you are watching this video on YouTube, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast, please leave the 5-star review. It would cost you nothing but help me a great deal, especially if you do so on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you feel particularly generous, consider supporting me via Patreon, PayPal, or Bitcoin.